I'm sure even breaking down your own preconceived ideas was not exactly the easiest thing.
For a long time, I believed that all of the premillennial dispensational stuff with the hokey pokey, you go up, you come back down, we get a body, and there's going to be a 7-year reign, and all of this other stuff. I believe that was garbage from the beginning. A friend of mine that I had talked to about this when I worked as a campus police officer for Vanderbilt back in the 1980s and 90s, he brought a book in one night and said, Eric, I've cleaned out my shelf. And I knew for him to say that this had to be a really good book. He said, I have one book, and it was David Chilton's Days of Vengeance. And that book was the first book that I ever saw take the events of Revelation and really show how everything happened in the first century. David Chilton did a great job, and later on, he went on to become a full preterist just before he died. Not many people know that. But that book started me on a journey of partial preterism, where I believe that everything through chapter 19 had to do with the destruction of Jerusalem. Chapters 20, 21, and 22 were still some future event that were to occur. So that's where I landed. And again, the atheist professor made me stop and take a look at what I believed and why I believed it, which was something that God had been forming with me from the day I became a Christian, because I kept running into people of different religions challenging me on Christianity. Why do you believe what you believe? And I would have to go back and study, and I'd come back to them, and then they wouldn't want to further that conversation because of my answers. Christianity makes the most sense of all the religions because everything can be backed by history, and it makes total sense when you see how the pieces of the puzzle fit together over thousands of years.
Hebrew is an interesting language, right? Because each letter is also a word that forms other words, but is also numerically valued. So, put another way, Hebrew is like a code
Yes.
in a lot of ways. And basic everyday speech, this was another reason why this topic is very important and to me made a lot of intuitive sense, like a piece of a puzzle, as you kind of mentioned there, was because their everyday speech was very metaphoric. Their everyday speech was very, I don't want to say like prophecy driven, but kind of like it was very like esoteric. It was very like vision based, and it was
Yeah.
very, you know what I mean? But like,
Yes.
so how would you describe that? Because this is also very, very important when you're jumping back and forth to find biblical context here.
Well, I think for one thing, look at the stories that Jesus told. All of them had an underlying meaning, and that was the way they communicated back and forth. Even their original language was in picture form. So when you look at things like the word, I believe it's Torah, when you really break that down, it's even leading you to a picture of Jesus dying on the cross. I haven't studied that the way I should have, but I think David Curtis is a preacher who did a series on the feast days. And when he was doing that, he pointed out very early on how a lot of the language was very pictorial in form. And when you look at some of the pictures of the letters, they were leading us to Christ all along. But there are a lot of things that we misunderstand. We look at things like, for example, when Jesus resurrected and he is with the guys and they had decided to go back fishing and they found him on the beach cooking the fish. We overlook things like the number of fish that they found was 153. Why is that so important? Is because they believed that at the time, that's how many species of fish there were. So what was Jesus communicating? That my gospel is for everyone. So little things like that we miss. When Jesus said, you didn't choose me, but I chose you, we think in terms of predestined things. What he was actually saying is that when someone became a disciple of a rabbi, usually they came up to the rabbi and asked if they could follow him. Jesus is making the point is that you guys didn't even make it out of rabbi school. and I came and chose you, showing that Jesus can use anyone, and he's interested in using all of us to further his mission.
So what stops, other than the preconceived ideas and dogma, what stops this from being more widely accepted, would you say?
Well, Paul talked about there would be a few things that would end. He talked about prophecy ending, tongues ending, and knowledge would cease. And when you do away with the Jewish understanding of the Bible, knowledge begins to cease as far as the New Testament. I think it was St. Augustine that said that the New Testament is in the Old Testament concealed and the Old Testament is in the New Testament revealed. But it's one of those questions where I have to ask, do we really believe that? Because everything from Revelation, there were 500 references from Revelation alone from the Old Testament. So we keep trying to make it fit something in the future. We make up things when the code to breaking down Revelation is in the Old Testament, the Tanakh. So if we would just simply go back and look at the symbols that are there, we would very easily, or more easily, understand the book of Revelation.
What's going on, guys? If you like that clip right there, you will love the full interview. You can check that out right there. I'll see you on the next video. Oh, and subscribe, because we got a lot of big things coming up in the near future.